My name is Ethan, and at 25, I had already managed to feel like an old man, drained dry by the electric hum of Chicago. My life had turned into an endless cycle of gray concrete, flickering neon signs, and the bitter aftertaste of coffee breath in cramped subway cars. So when a letter arrived from my grandmother Evelyn, a real one, written on yellowed, brittle paper that smelled of an attic and old times, I took it as a lifeline. Oak Creek was a tiny dot on the map of Nebraska, lost among endless plains, where the sky is so vast and heavy that it feels as if it could crush you with its azure weight if you let your guard down for even a moment. I arrived there in my old Chevrolet, which coughed gray dust at every bump in the broken dirt road. The landscape outside the window didn't change for hours, endless, hypnotic fields of corn and wheat, broken up by sparse, exhausted tree lines where the trees stood bare, like frightened ghosts. When I finally turned toward Grandpa Silas's house, the sun was already hanging dangerously low on the horizon, painting the world in an anxious, thick copper-red color, reminiscent of dried blood on old iron. The house stood at the very edge, isolated from the rest of the world. It was a massive two-story structure made of cedar blackened by time, its walls covered in a network of cracks resembling wrinkles on the face of a giant. A leaning fence surrounded it, its pickets jutting out of the ground at wild angles like rotten teeth. And beyond the fence began it, the field. An endless, terrifying ocean of tall, overripe wheat that in the coming twilight looked not golden, but dirty gray, almost ashen. The wind ran across the tops of the stalks, creating a sound like the whisper of thousands of dry voices arguing in the darkness about something ominous and eternal. That sound went straight to the bone, triggering an instinctive urge to cover my ears. Grandma Evelyn met me on the creaking porch. She looked much older than in the photographs from 5 years ago. Her skin resembled parchment etched with countless lines, and her faded eyes constantly darted around, repeatedly returning to the swaying wheat.
"Come in, Ethan. Quickly, bring the bags inside,"
she whispered instead of greeting me, the moment I shut off the engine.
"Dusk is coming. The air at this time becomes heavy, thick. It hurts to breathe if you stand on the threshold too long."
I hugged her, and the smell struck me. She didn't smell like home, not of apple pies or lavender soap. She reeked of a sharp, suffocating chemical odor, ammonia mixed with the acrid scent of dried wormwood and old, stale wax. It was the smell of protection, the smell of someone trying to shield themselves from something invisible. Grandpa Silas sat deep in the living room, submerged in half-light. He didn't even move to shake my hand or nod. He just sat there, his whitened fingers clenched around his old 12-gauge double-barreled shotgun resting on his knees, staring motionlessly out the window at the field. There was no warmth in his gaze, it was the look of a sentry who knows the enemy is already close. The air in the room was stale, filled with the smell of tobacco and fear. "It's beautiful here," I said, trying to force small talk as I set my heavy bag down on the creaking floor, which answered with a plaintive groan of wood.
"Beauty is just a mask, boy,"
Silas replied dully, almost lifelessly, without turning his head.
Remember the main rule of this house. The moment the edge of the sun touches the horizon, slide every bolt shut. Don't go near the windows, and whatever you hear out there, beyond the wall, it's just the wind playing with dry stalks. Don't trust your ears, Ethan. Wheat knows how to lie.
I nodded, deciding it was just dementia or the heavy consequences of a lonely life in the middle of nowhere. But when I went up to my old room on the second floor, I froze in the doorway. On every windowsill lay bundles of salt mixed with small, sharp mirror shards that dimly glimmered in the last rays of light. Along the entire length of the doorframe were deeply scratched strange, angular symbols resembling intertwined roots or veins trying to burst out of the wood. The room was cold, and the cold didn't come from the window, but as if from the walls themselves. The first night became a true test for my psyche. The silence in Oak Creek wasn't just the absence of sound, it was tangible, pressing against the eardrums like a column of water. No familiar chirping of birds, no crickets, no distant engine noise. Only the endless, dry whisper of the field seeping through the cracks in the siding. I lay on the hard bed, feeling every spring in the mattress, breathing in the smell of old dust, dampness, and something faintly metallic. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound that turned the blood in my veins to ice. It wasn't the usual creaking of an old house or a branch hitting glass. It was a scrape. Something long, solid, and impossibly sharp, like a bony growth or a massive claw, slowly, deliberately dragged itself along the wooden siding of the house right beneath my window. The sound was so methodical and calculated, as if the creature outside was carefully measuring the perimeter of my domain. Searching for a weak spot, I froze, afraid even to breathe. My palms instantly became damp, and my heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it would break through my chest. Then came a breath. It wasn't human breathing, nor the snort of an animal. It was a long, whistling, wet rasp accompanied by a gurgling sound, as if the creature had punctured lungs filled with mucus. I felt a sharp, icy draft sweep through the room, reeking of ozone, though the windows were locked with heavy bolts. The smell seeped through microscopic gaps in the frames. It was the unbearable stench of an old, dug-up grave, rotting autumn leaves, and burnt hair mixed with the sour odor of sweat. It was so dense it felt like you could cut it with a knife. Fighting the paralyzing terror, I forced myself to slide off the bed and crawl across the carpet to the window, pulling the heavy curtain aside by just a millimeter. The full moon flooded the field with a deathly, phosphorescent light. And there, right at the boundary between the wheat and the neatly cut lawn grass, I saw it. It looked like nothing I had ever seen or could imagine. It was enormous, hunched, covered in sparse, filthy tufts of pale fur beneath which sharp, protruding bones were visible. Its hind legs were abnormally long and powerful, with knees bent backward, while its front limbs ended in unnaturally elongated fingers, each crowned with a sickle-shaped claw at least a foot long. But the most horrifying part was its head. The creature had no eyes at all. In their place yawned 2 deep hollows covered with a gray, semi-transparent membrane that vibrated. Its jaw was disproportionately long, lined with hundreds of tiny, needle-like teeth that constantly clicked against each other, producing a dry sound like an old sewing machine. It stood absolutely motionless, its head turned toward my window. It wasn't seeing me, it was listening. Catching every beat of my heart, every vibration of my thoughts. I stopped breathing, feeling my lungs begin to burn. My fingers gripping the fabric turned white and numb. The creature took one heavy step toward the house, and I saw how under its monstrous weight the wheat didn't just bend, it snapped with a dry, distinct crack that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Then it made a sound, a quiet, vibrating low-frequency hum that clogged my ears and made my stomach churn with nausea. In the morning, when the first rays of sunlight dispersed the fog, I found 3 deep, jagged grooves on the outer wall of the house, directly beneath my window. The wood had been literally torn out, exposing pale, wet splinters oozing resin like tears. When, at breakfast, my hands trembling as I held a cup of coffee, I asked Grandpa about it, he only tightened his grip on the fork and muttered without lifting his eyes that it was some stray dog chasing a fox. But I knew there were no dogs in Oak Creek. There was no life here at all, except the wheat and whatever hid within it. The next few days turned into a slow, surreal nightmare. Time in Oak Creek seemed to stretch and thicken into a gray, viscous molasses. Grandma Evelyn began cooking meals with feverish, manic speed, as if we were under siege and time itself was running out. She constantly muttered incoherent prayers under her breath, in which I caught words in Latin and names that sent chills down my spine. Silas, meanwhile, stopped leaving the living room altogether. He sat in his chair, merged with its shadow, his eyes blood-red from burst vessels and total sleep deprivation. "Why don't you leave this place?" I asked on the 3rd day, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Grandma viciously peel potatoes. "This place. It's soaked in something evil. You see the marks, you hear those breaths at night. Why can't we just get in the car and leave forever?" Grandpa Silas slowly, with effort, turned his head toward me. His lips were dry and cracked.
We can't, Ethan. We have no right. We're part of a pact sealed with blood before your father was even born. If we leave, it won't stay here. It will follow the trail. It's bound to our blood, to this cursed land. The field isn't just crops, Ethan. It's its private garden, its hunting grounds, and we're either its gardeners, tending this nightmare, or its livestock, waiting our turn. And I'm afraid the time of harvest has come.
I realized I wouldn't get a straight answer, and a cold rage mixed with despair boiled in my chest. I decided to conduct my own investigation. While the old ones sank into a heavy, anxious sleep after lunch, I cautiously crept into the basement. It was damp and dark, the air smelled of mold and old earth. Behind piles of yellowed newspapers from the 1950s and dusty jars of crystallized jam, I found an old chest with a brand burned into its lid, an inverted ear of wheat wrapped in barbed wire. Inside were the journals of my great-great-grandfather. I began reading them, and with every page, reality around me began to crumble. 1892. The harvest was poor, the land cracked with thirst. Livestock died, and people gnawed on tree bark. Then Thomas brought that man in the black cloak from the distant woods. He said the land demanded an offering to live again. We were foolish and starving. We thought he wanted grain or wine. It turned out, he wanted essence. We awakened the reaper of the outskirts. Now he is here, he has taken root in our soil. We gave him a name, we acknowledged him as our God, and he gave us a harvest the world had never seen. But now he has grown. Sheep are no longer enough. He wants the eyes of those who bear our name. I flipped through pages written in a trembling hand, finding descriptions of horrific rituals practiced by the people of Oak Creek. It turned out this village wasn't just a settlement but a living altar to a creature they called the Stitch Beast. It ensured their prosperity, but the price was monstrous. With horror, I realized why I had been so insistently summoned here now. My 25th birthday was in 3 days. I was the first man of my generation. My grandparents weren't just hiding a secret, they had lured me here as a bargaining chip in their endless deal with death. The fourth night became the point of no return. The smell of burnt hair, which had previously only hinted in the air, now became dense and physically tangible. It soaked everything, my clothes, the bed linens, even the water from the well tasted of copper and rot. The air inside the house felt so thick that every movement required effort, as if I were moving underwater. Around midnight, the silence was torn apart by a scream. It wasn't the cry of an animal. It was a human scream, coming from the very edge of the field, where the wheat bordered the forest. It held so much primal agony and awareness of inevitable death that my fingertips instantly went cold and my tongue went numb. I burst out of my room and stumbled in the dark hallway into Silas, who stood there like a stone statue.
Back to your room! Lock yourself in!
He shouted, but his voice broke. Outside came a monstrous crash. The front door on the first floor shuddered under a blow of such incredible force that the massive wrought hinges screeched and began tearing out of the wood.
It's hungry ahead of time. It smells him.
Grandma Evelyn screamed from the kitchen, her voice filled with complete, bottomless despair. I didn't listen. Driven by a mad impulse, I ran to the living room window, tore away the bundles of salt, and slid back the heavy bolt. Silas tried to grab my shoulder, but I tore free. I saw the wheat field in the moonlight begin to move, parting to form a wide, straight corridor leading to our doorstep. The creature, the reaper, slowly emerged into the open. Up close, its body looked even more grotesque. It seemed assembled from decaying pieces of flesh from different beings, crudely stitched together with thick gray thread resembling tendons. In some places, skin was entirely absent, exposing black, glistening muscles that contracted with a wet sound. The creature's head was unnaturally elongated, its lipless maw perpetually ajar. Instead of a nose and ears, dark pits pulsed on its face, catching heat waves. The claws on its front limbs vibrated at such a frequency that the air around them trembled, producing a high, maddening ultrasonic whine. Its tail, a bare spine studded with sharp spines, lashed the ground, striking sparks and carving deep scars into the soil. It wasn't just hunting us, it reveled in our helplessness. The reaper effortlessly struck the wall of the house with its limb, and a massive chunk of cedar exploded into thousands of sharp splinters. Through the breach, straight into the warmth of the living room, pushed a pale, skinless snout dripping with thick black saliva that hissed on the carpet. Silas raised the shotgun and fired point blank. The blast in the enclosed space blinded me for a moment. The buckshot hit the creature directly in the jaw, tearing away a chunk of flesh and several nail-like teeth. But the reaper didn't even flinch. It only slowly turned its head and made a sound that made my legs buckle. It was mocking laughter composed of hundreds of human voices. In one lightning-fast motion, it knocked the gun from my grandfather's hands, snapping his fingers with a dry crack.
Run, Ethan. Run into the field, to the old stone well.
Grandma shouted, grabbing a kerosene lamp from the table and hurling it into the monster's face. Flames erupted, the reaper howled, and I, out of my mind with terror, bolted through the breach in the wall, straight into the cold night. I ran through the wheat, feeling as if I were sprinting through dense, thorny fog. The stalks, stiff and sharp, lashed my face, leaving dozens of small cuts that burned as if rubbed with molten salt. I heard the reaper pursuing me, not falling behind a single step. It didn't run on the ground, it literally floated across the tops of the wheat, its deformed back with black spines sometimes flashing above the golden heads like the fin of a prehistoric shark. The smell, that cursed, suffocating stench followed me everywhere. It clogged my nostrils, preventing my lungs from opening, triggering coughing fits. I stumbled over roots, fell into sticky mud, feeling the entire surface of the field vibrate under the weight of my pursuer. My lungs burned, and a stabbing pain pierced my side as if a knife had been driven in. I burst into a small clearing where an old, abandoned well stood. It was built of massive black stones covered in moss and sealed with heavy, rotten planks. The journal said this was the mouth of the earth itself, through which the reaper had been summoned into our world over a century ago. The creature burst out of the wheat directly in front of me, blocking my escape. It slowly rose onto its powerful hind legs, towering over me like a monument to primal evil. Its throat jaws slowly opened, revealing a pulsing black abyss.
Your blood is sweet. The harvest is complete.
I didn't beg for mercy or fall to my knees. In my hands I clutched a vial of concentrated ammonia and Silas's old lighter. I remembered from the journal how heavily the reaper relied on its thermal pits and chemical receptors. When the creature lowered its deformed head to snap my neck, I flung the entire contents of the vial straight into its maw and the sensitive pits on its face. The reaper let out a sound that seemed to split the sky itself. The chemical instantly burned its hypersensitive tissues. The creature went berserk, thrashing wildly, destroying everything around it. One such blow shattered the fragile masonry of the well. Gathering my last strength, I grabbed one of the broken planks and, using it as a lever, pushed the largest foundation stone straight into the gaping blackness of the well. A sound followed that I will remember until the day I die. It wasn't a splash or a crash. It was the sound of space itself breaking, a deep groan of reality. A column of icy gray mist smelling of eternity burst from the well. The reaper froze, its body graying and crumbling before my eyes, turning into dry, dead straw and dust. Some invisible force dragged it back into the well. It resisted, driving its claws deep into the earth, but it was useless. The last thing I saw before it vanished was its eyes. For a split second, something terrifyingly human flashed within that black void, endless. Ancient exhaustion and a plea for an end. And then everything went silent. I escaped Oak Creek at dawn, when the sky turned soft pink, as if mocking the horror I had endured. The field no longer whispered. The wheat stood completely still, dead and dry, as if life had been drained from every stalk at once. My grandparents remained in the house. They flatly refused to leave, saying their time had ended along with the Pact. As I drove away down the dusty road, looking in the rearview mirror, it seemed to me that the house was slowly sinking into the soil, becoming part of the landscape forever. I survived. But I am no longer the Ethan who came here seeking silence and peace. My hair has gone completely gray at the temples, and my hands still tremble whenever I smell ammonia or dry grass in a park. I live in the center of a vast city, on the 20th floor, surrounded by glass and steel, as far from the earth and anything that can grow in it as possible, but sometimes, especially on dark autumn nights, when the wind slams hard against the panoramic glass, I hear that familiar scrape. And I know that ancient evil never truly dies. It only sleeps when deprived of its food. A pact written in generations of blood cannot simply be cancelled. It can only be postponed, and every time I see a wheat field from a train window, I feel the familiar taste of ash and grave soil in my mouth. The harvest continues, in my memory, forever.